They thought we would beg. That's the first thing they got wrong. The fleet came out of nowhere. No warning. No contact. Just metal and fire, tearing through the edge of our solar system like it meant nothing. Whole defense stations went silent. The ships that managed to send distress signals were already breaking apart, scattering debris across the stars. At first, people didn't believe it. We'd had threats before. Pirates. Minor alien groups looking to test their strength. We'd always pushed them back. But this wasn't a skirmish. It was a purge. They called themselves the Atrenid. We learned the name when one of our ships tried to surrender. A science vessel, unarmed, engines barely working, transmitted a peaceful message. An old woman on board, the last survivor, offered coordinates to Earth in exchange for mercy. They didn't even answer her. They vaporized the ship mid-transmission. That's when everyone understood. This wasn't about negotiation. It wasn't about control or even resources. They wanted us gone. Extinct. But humans don't die easy. At the edge of Saturn's orbit, a last-ditch fleet formed in secret. Old warships. Cargo freighters welded with scrap armor. Half of them barely worked. Still they flew. And on every deck, in every hallway, there were people who knew exactly what was at stake. Mechanics with shaking hands. Farmers with cracked fingers gripping weapons they'd never trained to use. Children learning evacuation drills in underground shelters, trying not to cry. They said the Atrenid were perfect. Genetically engineered, enhanced over centuries of ruthless evolution. Every soldier was built for one purpose: domination. They didn't know fear. They didn't understand compassion. And they couldn't see weakness in the way humans held on to each other. That was mistake number 2. One ship got through. Just one. It breached Earth's atmosphere like a burning knife, crashing into the oceans off the Pacific coast. Everyone thought it was an attack. Sirens screamed. People ran. Emergency broadcasts flooded every screen. But no one fired. The ship didn't move. It just sat there half-sunk and smoking. A team was sent to investigate. Divers. Engineers. Military personnel. They descended into the dark waters with shaky breath and full weapons loadouts. What they found wasn't a battle-ready crew. It wasn't even alive. The Atrenid inside were dead. All of them. Not from wounds. Not from gunfire. But something else. Their skin had blackened, cracked. Their suits were torn from the inside. Their faces frozen in something that looked close to fear. A message was found, carved into the inner wall of the ship's cargo bay. 5 words scorched into the metal. They burn. They do not stop. The scientists didn't understand. Not right away. But someone in intelligence made the connection. The Atrenid ship hadn't just crashed, it had fled. Something had hit it. Something they hadn't expected. And it came from Earth. Nobody knew what it was. A weapon? A virus? Something ancient we'd accidentally woken up? Whatever it was, the Atrenid were afraid of it. Afraid enough to abandon their formation and run. That changed everything. In the silence that followed, Earth prepared. This time we didn't ask for peace. We didn't wait for orders from crumbling governments. The people rose. Not because we had the best weapons or the strongest soldiers. But because we had one thing they couldn't understand. Hope. Hope is dangerous when it's cornered. Underground, hidden beneath miles of steel and rock, something stirred. Not a monster. Not a god. But something older. Something buried when the world was still young and the skies burned with fire. We didn't even know it had survived. But it had. It had been watching. And when it heard our cries, it listened. The first sign came in the Arctic. A communication station picked up a sound no one could trace. Oh, rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. But not human. The ice cracked. Temperatures rose. Animals fled. And then the lights started to die. All across the world, power grids flickered. Not from an attack, but something deeper. The magnetic field was shifting. Scientists panicked. Military leaders yelled into their headsets, demanding answers. And in the chaos, an old man in a worn-out observatory looked through a cracked telescope and whispered the words that silenced the room. It's waking up. No one asked what it was. Everyone just knew. The next fleet arrived 2 weeks later. Twice the size of the first. No warnings. No hesitation. They began slaughtering colonies on Mars and Europa. Human screams echoed through abandoned ships, broadcasted through open channels. Atrenid soldiers walked through blood-soaked corridors without slowing. But Earth did not fall. Not this time. We had changed. In the hills outside an old European city, a boy with a shattered leg watched the sky burn red and waited for his older brother to return from the front lines. In South America, A woman who had lost 3 sons sharpened a steel blade and strapped it to her back. In space, a former janitor piloted a stolen cargo shuttle straight into the enemy fleet, dragging a makeshift nuclear core behind him. He didn't ask for glory. He didn't ask for revenge. He just whispered a name, his daughter's, and then lit the sky on fire. That was the third mistake. The Atrenid thought we feared death. They didn't understand that for humans, death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of memory. It was the start of something deeper: rage, love, sacrifice. The kind of emotions you can't calculate or design in a lab. They thought wiping us out would be easy. What they got was extinction. Not ours. Theirs. It didn't happen all at once. It started with small cracks. Ships that didn't return. Soldiers who froze mid-charge, screaming in a language they had no right to know. Whole units that turned their weapons on themselves, whispering human names they'd never heard. Something was inside them. Not possession. Not infection. Something deeper. Humanity had changed, but it wasn't because of a new weapon. It wasn't because of some alien artifact. It was because we remembered. We remembered pain. We remembered love. We remembered loss. And something, somewhere, whatever had been watching, decided we were worth saving. Or maybe just worth unleashing. One Atrenid commander broke ranks. He sent a signal encrypted in their own strange language. Our intercept teams almost missed it. But the message was clear. We are not the hunters. Not here. Not anymore. They started to retreat. Not many. Just a few ships. Quiet. Discreet. Trying to slip out of the solar system like shadows, hoping not to be seen. But they didn't make it far. Something caught them. Not humans. Not machines. Something faster. One by one, the fleeing ships were torn apart. No weapon signatures. No debris trails. Just silence. And then, the voice. It came through every comms channel. Every frequency. A low, hollow sound. Too deep to be human. Too cold to be mechanical. But inside it there was something familiar. It spoke in our language. I see you. That was all. Just 3 words. But the message behind them was clear. Whatever had awoken, whatever had decided to rise, was no longer sleeping. It had chosen a side. And it wasn't theirs. Now the skies above Earth are quiet again. For now. The wreckage still burns in orbit. Cities still mourn. Families dig through rubble and bury empty coffins. But somewhere beneath the ground, beneath the crust and molten rock, something watches. Not as a protector. Not as a savior. But as something that saw what they did to us and decided that enough was enough. Something that remembers. And far above, in a place even light struggles to reach, the last Atrenid commanders argue behind steel walls. They shout over glowing maps and failing plans. They speak of retreat, of surrender, of turning their weapons inward before humanity does it for them. But they are too late. Much too late. Because they didn't just start a war. They woke something. And now no one, not even us, knows how to stop it. The question is no longer how we survive. The question is what we've become. And when the stars begin to burn, when the last screams echo through cold metal halls, they will remember the day they tried to erase us. Not as a day of victory, but as the day their own extinction began. Because in their arrogance, in their cold precision, they forgot the one truth no conqueror should ever ignore. When you try to kill a species that refuses to die, what you get is extinction. The skies stayed quiet, but no one trusted the silence. They said the war was still happening, just not where we could see it. Up past the edge of the solar system, past the dark corners of space we hadn't mapped yet, something was still moving. Something was still fighting. The only question was who. Every government still left tried to calm the public. Speeches, broadcasts, promises of victory. But people had stopped listening. Not out of rebellion but exhaustion. They didn't need politicians. They needed answers. And answers were in short supply. Some believed Earth had unlocked an ancient weapon, hidden deep inside the planet. Others thought a consciousness, maybe from humanity's distant ancestors, had finally awakened, called out by the suffering of its children. The theories spread like wildfire. None of them brought peace. In the ruins of old cities, survivors dug out what they could. Broken radios. Melted steel. Pieces of ships that didn't belong to Earth. They turned alleyways into labs and garages into bunkers. Not because they thought they could win the war on their own, but because it was all they had left. One man, a former engineer, sat in the shell of a collapsed apartment building. His daughter was gone. His hands trembled whenever he tried to pick up a tool. But still he worked. Every night, by firelight and memory he worked. He wasn't trying to build a weapon. He was trying to understand the wreckage. The shard of a Trenid armor he'd found near the ocean had markings on it. Not just alien writing but scratches. Deep, uneven, frantic. Like something inside had been trying to claw its way out. It wasn't fear that haunted him. Was the question. Why would something bred for war try to escape its own suit? That question echoed everywhere. In labs beneath mountains. In the minds of children who no longer played. In dreams that came too close to nightmares. Even in space, where the few remaining patrol ships drifted past debris fields, there were signs. Strange frequencies. Ghost signals. Pieces of code that didn't belong. One captain, a woman with no crew left and half her body held together by pressure braces, recorded what she heard before her ship vanished. It wasn't language. It was sobbing. Not human. Not a Trenid. But something else entirely. A new kind of silence followed that recording. Not the calm before the storm, but the breath between screams. Back on Earth, strange things began to happen. Not disasters. Not attacks. Little things. Animals behaving oddly. Birds that no longer flew south. Whales swimming in strange patterns, like they were tracing something across the ocean floor. One boy in the desert found a ring of black stones that hadn't been there the day before. No one believed him. But weeks later, satellites picked up the same formation, hundreds of miles away. There were whispers too. People started hearing voices in their sleep. Not dreams. Not hallucinations. Voices. They didn't say much. Just fragments. It sees. Not alone. Don't forget. Most tried to ignore them. Denial was easier. But others, scientists, soldiers, even regular people, started searching. For proof. For a pattern. For anything that made sense. They didn't find comfort. They found the black zone. It was a stretch of land in what used to be a forest. After the first Atrenid wave, the area was left scorched and dead. No signs of life. No radiation. Just silence. But something had changed. The trees had started growing again, but wrong. Twisted, dark, reaching toward the sky like claws. And beneath them the ground pulsed. Like a heartbeat. A research team was set. Armed, trained, and afraid. They lasted 6 hours. The feed went dark mid-sentence. When recovery drones arrived, all they found were their boots. And a phrase carved into a stone that hadn't been there before. Not theirs. Not yours. Not yet. People argued over the meaning. Some said it was a warning. Others thought it was an invitation. But no one entered the black zone again. Not officially. Unofficially, people still went missing. The world kept spinning, but nothing felt the same. It wasn't just the loss. It wasn't even fear. It was something colder. Uncertainty. The idea that maybe we were no longer in control, not just of our future but our past. Maybe we'd misunderstood our place in the galaxy. Maybe we weren't the clever survivors. Maybe we were the bait. The Atrenid hadn't returned. But some of their wreckage had. Shards of hull. Torn pieces of their suits. Even a few corpses found floating in the upper atmosphere like discarded toys. Their expressions were all the same. Terror. Not fear of war. Fear of something else. One corpse had deep cuts across its chest, made with surgical precision. But the tissue didn't bleed. Instead, it flaked off like ash. Inside, something metallic pulsed faintly, until it shattered in open air. The doctor who saw it first refused to speak for 3 days. When she finally did, she only said this. They're not born. They're printed. But something got in anyway. That's what started the second wave of panic. If the Atrenid weren't fully biological, if they were printed, designed, manufactured, then someone had corrupted their blueprint. Someone had infected the source. But who? And more importantly, how? Data analysts combed through every fragment of Atrenid code, every piece of captured tech. And they started finding it. Patterns. Repetition. Not in their language. In ours. Buried inside command lines, deep beneath control systems and neural layers, were human words. Half-formed. Misspelled. Out of order. But clearly ours. Remember us. She weeps. Not silence. They weren't commands. They were messages. And whoever, or whatever, was sending them was using the enemy's machines to do it. That's when some started asking the question everyone else was afraid to say out loud. What if this wasn't about us? What if the Atrenid weren't here to conquer? What if they were running? From Earth? Or something beneath it? The fear changed shape then. It turned inward. We stopped watching the skies and started watching each other. Looking for signs. Looking for cracks. Some started seeing things, shadows that moved wrong. Reflections that didn't match. Machines flickering on and off in perfect rhythm like they were breathing. A pilot swore he saw a star blink out mid-flight. Not go dim. Not get eclipsed. Just vanish. He quit the next day and disappeared into the mountains. We never found him. The world slowed down. Not because it was over, but because we didn't know what to do next. We'd fought the monsters. We'd survived the invasion. But the real enemy, the real question, it hadn't even shown its face yet. It was waiting. And it wasn't just out there. It was in us. One woman, a school teacher from what used to be the Midwest, began writing during the nights. Not in any known language. Her hands moved on their own. She filled hundreds of pages, eyes glazed over, voice quiet. When linguists analyzed the script, they froze. It wasn't alien. It was old Earth tongue. Prehistoric. A language no one should have remembered. But it wasn't just language. It was a map. Not of the stars. Of the inside. Inside the Earth. Inside the mind. The teacher died 3 days later. No wounds. No illness. Just a single tear down her cheek and a final whisper. I gave it a name. What name no one knew. The pages were locked away. But not before a copy leaked to a rogue data group. They translated enough to release 3 words. Beneath. Between. Before. 3 words. No answers. But something shifted after that. Weather patterns changed. Deserts grew colder. Ocean currents reversed in places. The moon's orbit drifted by millimeters, just enough for people to notice. And every night more people heard the whisper. Some started answering back. No one knows what they said. But those who did, they stopped dreaming. They stopped sleeping. And they started building things. Little machines. Statues of materials they couldn't explain. They dug holes in the ground and refused to come out. And in every place they did this, the birds stopped singing. Something was moving. Not fast. Not loud. But steady. Through the earth. Through minds. Through memory. And still no one knew if it was protecting us. Or replacing us. That's the part no one could agree on. Some said we were chosen. Others said we were contaminated. A few just smiled and said, it was always coming. The stars have started flickering now. Astronomers report dark spots in space that don't behave like planets or black holes. They shift. They move. And they're all facing us. Not the sun. Like they're waiting for us to do something. Or become something. The last known Atrenid message was picked up just hours ago. One of our deep listening satellites caught it, buried in static. Faint. Failing. But real. Only 2 words translated clearly. Too late. And now the winds blow differently. Children cry at random even when nothing's wrong. People see shapes in clouds that look too sharp. Too precise. Like letters. Like warnings. No one knows what comes next. But it's not peace. And it's not over. The sky cracked. No sound. No explosion. Just a thin, jagged line splitting the night sky, like someone had drawn across the stars with a trembling hand. It didn't go away. People stared up, mouths open, not sure if they were seeing a trick of the atmosphere or something far worse. It pulsed once. Just once. And then everything below it began to change. Not violently. Not all at once. But slowly. Precisely. Machines stopped responding. Not just old tech or scavenged gear but new ones too, systems untouched since the war ended. Hospital monitors. Power relays. Satellites. All of them began to hum at the same strange frequency. A tone so low most couldn't hear it. But children did. They held their ears and screamed, even when no one else could hear anything. And when they stopped screaming they started drawing. Every child, across different continents, broken towns, underground shelters, began sketching the same thing. A circle surrounded by 7 smaller shapes with a line cutting down the center. Some said it looked like a symbol. Others said it was a door. And still, no one knew who, or what, was trying to open it. Panic spread again, quiet and creeping. The kind that didn't explode in chaos, but seeped into every breath. People didn't riot. They didn't protest. They simply stopped trusting anything outside their own line of sight. Everyone wanted to believe the danger was over, that humanity had survived the worst of it. But in every corner of the world, the same signs kept showing up. Crops rotted overnight. Entire lakes vanished. Animals began avoiding certain areas, forming tight packs, always facing the same direction, toward the places where machines had gone quiet. Toward the pulse. Something was calling. In one hidden lab, a transmission was decoded, this time from one of the old Atrenid command drones that had fallen in orbit. It shouldn't have worked. The drone had been silent for months, powered down and sealed in lead. But it turned on. And it said one thing. We buried it. You fed it. Now we all hear it. The man who heard the message quit that same night. He didn't go home. He just walked into the woods behind the compound and never came back. The scientists didn't talk about it again. People started disappearing. Not just in the forests or mountains but in cities too. In broad daylight. No struggle. No trace. Just gone. One survivor, an old woman from the southern zones, claimed she saw it happen. Said her neighbor was standing in his garden, staring up at the sky like he heard something beautiful. Then the air shimmered around him. Like heat but wrong. Too sharp. And then he was gone. No flash. No sound. Just gone. And in his place the grass grew black. Not burned. Replaced. Something was happening beneath their feet. Sensors and old seismic stations picked up movement, regular, rhythmic. Like footsteps. Massive ones. Not coming from outside. From below. Something that had been sleeping. Something that had been ignored. Or forgotten. Every time it moved, the pulse returned. Every time it moved, more machines woke up. But not for us. They weren't responding to human commands anymore. Not even the oldest models. Not even manually. They weren't listening to people. They were listening to something else. One survivor found a screen flashing over and over. Begin again. Begin again. Begin again. He smashed it with a rock and left it buried. Some said it was just the tech glitching out. Others weren't so sure. A global emergency broadcast was attempted. An old analog line, patched through from one of the few still functioning orbital relays. But when the broadcast went live, it didn't deliver instructions. It didn't give updates. It played audio. Crying. Human crying. Not screams. Not yelling. Just soft sobs. Over and over. Then silence. And one final phrase. We remember what you forgot. After that, no more signals came through. That was when the fire started. Not natural ones. Not caused by bombs or fuel. Spontaneous ignition. Stone and steel catching flame in places fire shouldn't exist. In cities long abandoned, old structures lit up with blue flames that danced against gravity. They didn't spread. They just stood there, flickering against the dark. Like candles at a funeral no one remembered attending. A new fear gripped the survivors. It wasn't about war anymore. It was about awakening. The earth itself began to act strange. Fault lines where there had been none, magnetic fields shifting suddenly. Birds flew in tight spirals, then dropped from the sky, their bodies unharmed but their minds gone. Some scientists believed it was a mass-scale manipulation of electromagnetic systems. Others believed it was a message. But a message for who? Not all feared it. A small group had started gathering, once strangers now bonded by the voices in their heads. They didn't seem afraid. They moved through ruined streets with purpose. Eyes blank. Smiling. They were building something. No one knew what. People tried to stop them. They failed. Not because of weapons. Not because of power. But because when they got too close, they forgot why they came. They'd stop. Blink. Look around, confused. And then leave. Every time. Like the idea had been pulled straight out of their minds. One woman tried to document it. Her last entry read, I can't write what I saw. Every time I try, it vanishes. But I remember the feeling. It knew me. Her journal ended with a burned page. There were still no answers. But more signs. The oceans began to boil, not all at once but in slow, random patches. Steam rising from nowhere. And beneath the waves, old satellites picked up something massive. Moving. Living. It didn't match any known structure or life form. But it had shape. And it was heading toward land. That's when the fear peaked. Not screaming panic. Not chaos. Something worse. Acceptance. A heavy silence spread. As if everyone across the planet realized together that something was coming. Something that couldn't be fought. Couldn't be reasoned with. And they still didn't know if it wanted to save them. Or replace them. Some survivors began preparing to leave Earth. Not to escape but to watch from a distance. Old ships were refitted. Risky launches planned. But every time a ship reached orbit, it went dark. Not exploded. Not attacked. Just dark. Like something was turning them off. The only working satellite left recorded a frame of one such ship, right before it vanished. On the hull, etched in perfect circles, was the same symbol the children had drawn. A door. Still closed. But no longer locked. Now the world waits. Cities empty. People silent. The pulse stronger than ever. And beneath every footstep, something breathes. Still hidden. Still waking. And closer than anyone wants to admit. A week passed. No more disappearances. No more transmissions. No more flames in the distance. Just silence. It felt worse than the chaos. People whispered like the world could hear them now, like the very air might take offense if they spoke too loudly. Some stopped speaking altogether. But everyone knew the same thing: whatever had been waking up was now watching. And then something broke. It wasn't the machines, not this time. It was the sky. One morning, without warning, the sun didn't rise. Not completely. It hovered, low on the horizon, casting a permanent burnt orange hue over the land. Time itself felt strange. Clocks ticked but slower. Shadows stretched too far, moved when no one did. It wasn't darkness. It wasn't night. It was wrong. A small group of survivors in the western ruins noticed something else. Animals started returning. But they were different. Not sick. Not hostile. Just quiet. Watching too. Deer standing in the middle of empty roads. Owls blinking in full daylight. A bear resting in the skeleton of an old diner, unmoving as if frozen in time. And all of them facing the same direction. Toward a place not marked on any map. A dead zone. The place where the pulse began. They called it the center. No one remembered what city it used to be. It didn't matter now. It was just a scar on the earth. Satellites had once captured images of it, showing massive geometric patterns carved into the land. Too perfect to be natural, too massive to be human. But those images were gone now. Only rumors remained. Some said the center was hollow. Some said it was a cradle. But then came the second twist, something no one expected. A new signal appeared. Not from space. Not from machines. From inside the earth. Low, slow trembling. It carried through rock and soil and steel. Vibrations with no real sound. But people still heard it. Not with ears. With memory. Old memories. Buried ones. People across the world began remembering things that never happened to them. A man in the northern zones remembered holding a baby girl who never existed. A woman in the east swore she remembered drowning in a sea she'd never seen. Children began dreaming of voices in strange languages, ones they could speak perfectly, even though they'd never heard them before. It wasn't just memory loss anymore. It was memory replacement. Something was rewriting them. Rewriting their past. One soldier, hardened and half-deaf from old wars, fell to his knees in the middle of a patrol, tears streaming down his face. "They're putting something in me," he whispered. "Memories that aren't mine. I don't want them, but they're beautiful." He died later that night. Not from injury. Not from fear. From heartbreak. His last words: "It loved me once." Scientists were too afraid to even study the phenomenon. Every test led nowhere. Instruments failed. Data vanished. Notes erased themselves. One researcher tied herself to her desk and carved everything she learned into her arm. But when others found her, the carvings were just words. "Forgive us. We didn't mean to wake it alone." That's when the second twist became clear. This wasn't a leftover threat from the war. It wasn't a buried weapon. It wasn't even alien. It was us. Or something that came from us. The war hadn't just wiped out civilizations. It had dug too deep. The weapons used, massive, reality-tearing pulses meant to fracture entire enemy fleets, had left wounds. Not just in space. Not just in matter. In time. Something had slipped through. Not a creature. A presence. Something that had once been part of humanity, but had been exiled. Forgotten. Buried so far down in the collective memory that not even stories remained. Until we fed it. Until we poured pain and rage and grief into the ground for decades. Remembered. And it was coming back. Not to destroy us. But to rejoin us. Piece by piece. Mind by mind. And we were letting it. Some welcomed the feeling. It made the fear go away. Made the loneliness vanish. Made them feel whole again. But others saw what came next. They saw what rejoining meant. They saw the cost. The people who surrendered to the presence, who gave in to the rewritten memories, changed. Slowly. Physically. Just enough to notice. Eyes darker. Skin warmer. Voices too calm. They smiled more. They stopped asking questions. They started building again. But not for survival. For arrival. They weren't waiting anymore. They were preparing. And no one knew what for. A rebel group managed to capture one of them, a former friend, someone they trusted. He didn't fight back. Didn't resist. He just sat there, tied up, smiling faintly. When asked what he was building, he said, "A seat." A seat for who? He looked at them, not with malice, not even pity, just a strange kind of affection. For what you used to be. They left him in the room overnight. By morning he was gone. Rope still tied. No signs of escape. Just dust. And a small etched circle on the floor. The same symbol. The same door. The pulse returned that night, louder, heavier. It shook the bones. It made the air taste like ash. But this time it came with a voice. Not from a machine. Not from a broadcast. From inside. A whisper behind every heartbeat. You will not be erased. You will be reshaped. That same phrase echoed in hundreds of people's minds, all across the globe. It didn't hurt. It didn't threaten. But it changed them. Made them feel safe. And that was the most dangerous part. No one knows what's going to happen next. But something has shifted. Something has opened. The sky still bleeds orange. The ground still trembles. The animals still stare. And in the middle of the dead zone, a light pulses from beneath the soil, deep, rhythmic, and patient. A signal. Or a countdown. And every day more people walk toward it. Not because they're forced. Because they want to. The rest of humanity watches. Torn between stopping it and following. And somewhere far below the earth, something waits. It waits with arms open, ready to embrace whatever's left of us. Whatever we used to be. Whatever we're becoming. The presence is no longer hiding. It's knocking. And we're almost ready to answer. The ground split open at dawn. No one touched it. No machine caused it. There was no tremor. No violence. Just a long, clean fracture stretching across the horizon, perfectly straight, as if drawn by a hand larger than anything the world had ever known. People stopped what they were doing, walking, building, watching, and turned toward the soundless rupture. A deep silence followed. Not fear. Not awe. Something more ancient. Recognition. Those who had changed first, the ones who smiled too calmly, who no longer needed rest, began moving. As one. Toward the fracture. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They just walked. Some barefoot. Some bleeding. All of them smiling. They called it the return path. The rest of the survivors, scattered across the remaining cities and bunkers, watched the footage with their hands over their mouths, unsure whether to scream or cry. Because what they saw wasn't just a migration. It was a surrender. But not in the way they feared. These people weren't giving up. They were giving in. That's when the signals started to shift again. This time they came through old frequencies, ones that hadn't been used since the early satellite wars. Shortwave, analog, even Morse code. But it wasn't human transmissions. It was a voice. A single voice. Unmistakably human. Only wrong. Like someone mimicking humanity through static and memory. The message repeated once every hour. You were never meant to be alone. You were never meant to forget. We remember. We remember all of you. And then it would broadcast names. Thousands of names. Of people long gone. People who had never been born. People who didn't exist in any record, any database. And yet, some remembered them. Some wept at the names. One woman collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. That was my son, she said, trembling. I never had a child. But I know that name. I remember holding him. I remember his laugh. I remember everything. She wasn't alone. People across the world began grieving lives they never lived. Mourning children they never bore. Lovers they never kissed. Moments that weren't part of any timeline. Moments that felt more real than their own lives. Whatever had been buried beneath the world wasn't just a presence. It was a library. A memory. A mirror of everything humanity could have been. Every possibility, every forgotten path, every heartbeat that never beat. It wasn't returning to punish. It was returning to restore. But the cost of that restoration was steep. Because it wasn't giving memories back. It was replacing them. Piece by piece. And not just minds. Biology started changing. The people walking toward the fracture began to glow faintly at night. Not bright. Not radiant. Just enough to make shadows lean away from them. Their skin looked warmer. Their bones stronger. Eyes clearer. But inside. Something else entirely. Doctors, what few remained, ran emergency tests on one of them after he collapsed mid-journey. His blood contained microscopic filaments. Organic, yes, but untraceable to any earthly organism. When magnified, the filaments vibrated in unison to the sound of a heartbeat. But not his. The Earth's. That was the moment the third truth shattered through. This wasn't just a memory coming back. This wasn't just humanity being rewritten. This was the planet itself. Remembering. The Earth had carried the scars of our wars, our machines, our fire. But beneath all that ruin, it had also carried something else. Something we had forgotten. something we left, our past, our root. And now, after centuries of bleeding, the planet had begun to pull us back to it, to rebuild us. Not as what we had become, but as what we once were. Oh, connected. And terrifying. Because we had grown apart for a reason. The commanders of the last unmerged cities began panicking. They set up blockades. They issued lockdowns. They tried to suppress the signals. But it was no use. The change had already started. You didn't have to walk the path to feel it anymore. It was in the air, in the water, in the dreams. Some soldiers defected. Others turned weapons on themselves. Not out of fear. Out of remorse. One of them, an older man with shaking hands and half a lung left from chemical burns, wrote a note before he vanished. We were the ones who cut ourselves off. We blamed the stars, the machines, the war. But it was always us. We knew what we were connected to. We feared it. And now, it's here to finish what we started. People began to vanish in broad daylight. No struggle. No sign of pain. They would stop in the street, take a breath, and dissolve into a shimmer of light and sound, like music being played backward, like rain evaporating mid-fall. No bones. No clothes. Just memory scattered into the wind. The last safe zones crumbled after that. Not because they were attacked. Because they were invited. And the invitations were always personal. A memory from childhood. A scent from a house that no longer existed. A voice from a dream you never wanted to wake from. One by one people stopped resisting. But not everyone. There were still a few who held on. Not out of pride. Not out of hate. But because they couldn't let go of who they were. What they'd become. A woman who once led a massive refugee camp stood at the edge of the return path and stared down into the light bleeding from the fracture. It was warm. Beautiful. It sang to her. She turned away. She whispered, "We clawed our way to this point. We survived the collapse, the fire, the endless sky. We are not a mistake. We're not something to be corrected." But even as she said it, a tear rolled down her cheek. Because part of her knew. It wasn't trying to erase her. It was trying to bring her home. The stakes were now beyond anything measurable. The world wasn't dying. It was being reclaimed. The final broadcasts crackled across the remaining networks. They didn't give orders. They didn't ask for help. They just spoke truth. One voice trembling, alone in the static. We thought extinction meant death. We thought we'd vanish. We were wrong. What they got was us. All of us. All our dreams. All our sins. Every piece scattered across time and buried in the dirt. Now we're coming back together. And it's beautiful. And it's terrifying. And none of us are ready. The fracture grew wider that night. The light pulsed stronger. The earth no longer felt like ground. It felt like breath. And something beneath it was almost done waking up. The sky turned a deep shade of gold just before the final breach. No one knew if it was dawn or dusk anymore. Time had lost meaning. The sun hadn't moved in hours. Or maybe it was the planet that had stopped. Satellites were silent. Clocks ticked in slow, uneven beats. Animals had gone quiet. Even the wind stood still. And in that stillness, the earth exhaled. The fracture that had split the world open was no longer just a scar in the land. It had widened into something else. It glowed so brightly it hurt to look at, not with heat but with memory. It pulsed in rhythm with the hearts of those still standing. Every beat echoed with fragments of old lives, names long buried, moments lost. Those who had resisted the pull, the few that held on to what remained of the old world, now stood at the edge watching as the rest of humanity vanished into light. Some wept. Others clenched their fists. But none turned away. A decision had to be made. The woman who had once led the refugee camp, her eyes hollow but steady, stepped forward. She held in her hand a worn-out audio recorder, filled with the voices of people who had long disappeared. She pressed play. It was the laughter of children. Then the voice of an old man telling a story about the stars. Then a woman humming a song no one had heard in generations. All of them gone. But somehow still here. The earth had not destroyed them. It had kept them. Every soul. Every dream. Every pain. It had carried it all, waiting for the right moment to give it back. But not as it was. As it should have been. That was the truth the survivors finally understood. Extinction wasn't about erasure. It was about rewriting. The planet hadn't turned on them. It had turned toward them. It had taken their broken history, their shattered future, and tried to offer something different. A second chance. Not for one person. Not for one nation. For the whole of humanity. But the price of that chance? Letting go. The woman stood on the edge of the fracture, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. Behind her, others waited, unsure, afraid. She looked at them, her voice soft. We survived everything: war, starvation, the collapse. We did it alone. We made it this far by holding on. But maybe now, we have to let go. Someone asked, but what if we lose ourselves? She answered, maybe that's the point. And she stepped in. The light swallowed her without sound. There was no scream, no flash, just a breath. And then she was gone. More followed. One by one. Some with hesitation. Some running. The light never resisted. It welcomed. Those left behind stood still, hearts pounding, the air thick with something more than fear, something like reverence. Until only one remained. A man who had once been a scientist, though the labs were dust now. He had spent years trying to find answers, coding maps into ash, tracking frequencies that led nowhere. He had seen too much. Lost too much. He didn't believe in magic. Not in miracles. But this wasn't either. It was memory. He whispered to no one, we thought we were the story. But maybe, we were just the beginning. And with that he turned and stepped forward. The earth closed behind him. Silence fell. For a long time it seemed like nothing remained. No cities. No smoke. No towers. No machines. Only wind and light and soil. But deep beneath the surface something stirred. Not violent. Not loud. A heartbeat. The new kind. The one that carried voices, not commands. Dreams, not data. A new network built not from wires or code, but from memory, woven through every root, every stream, every mountain. And it spoke not in words but in knowing. A sense that nothing was lost. Nothing had been wasted. Everything was remembered. But just when the peace felt final, when the world had exhaled its last sigh of resolution, something changed. Far above the atmosphere, in the void where no sound lives, a new satellite blinked awake. It wasn't human. Its design was sharper, more advanced, clearly alien. It scanned the planet, paused on the fracture's remains, and pulsed out a message in a language no one had ever spoken before. The pulse hit the earth. The heartbeat paused, then doubled. A warning? A signal? Or something worse? In a place where extinction had become rebirth, something else had just noticed. And it was coming. The satellite drifted in silence, but its signal reverberated through the earth like a whispered memory from another universe. For a moment, it felt like time held its breath again, waiting. The ground didn't shake. The sky didn't split. There was just a pause, deep and still, as if the entire planet was listening. And then came the answer. From beneath the soil, from the oldest roots of the earth, something responded. Not a defense. Not a warning. But a welcome. Because the earth remembered. It remembered when the stars first called to humankind, when they looked up not for conquest but for wonder. It remembered the early explorers who launched themselves into the dark without knowing if they'd return. It remembered sacrifice, bravery, and moments so full of hope they could bend time itself. The earth had carried all of it, kept it alive within itself when humanity nearly let go of it all. The alien satellite didn't speak in words. But it listened. It watched. It measured the frequency of the world and its new pulse. What it found was not a threat. What it found was an answer to a question that had lingered far too long in the void. What happens after extinction? The answer now pulsed across every continent, humming through rivers, mountains, and the newly formed light veins of the planet. Life. Not the kind humans had before, but something deeper, more connected. In the fracture where the last of the old humans had stepped through, a new figure emerged. They weren't exactly like the ones who had gone in. Their face held echoes of those people, their eyes full of the same determination and ache. But there was something different now. A calmness. A sense of place. They knelt, touching the earth. It felt warm, alive. They whispered words that hadn't been spoken in generations. Not commands. Not fear. Thanks. Others followed. Slowly, the new humanity began to return. But they didn't rebuild in the way the old world would have. There were no skyscrapers. No noise. No endless engines. Instead, homes grew from the land itself, shaped by thought, not force. Energy flowed like wind, gentle but powerful. Communication didn't rely on machines anymore. It was something purer, more direct. Felt rather than heard. They didn't forget who they had been. The names, the stories, the failures, they were all kept. But not as shame. As guidance. The satellite stayed. Orbiting quietly, it began to transmit not warnings but observations. Notes. Records. It became the watcher, the silent librarian of this second life. And far away, somewhere among stars untouched by human ships, others listened. They learned what the earth had done. They learned what humanity had become. Some feared it. Others hoped. But no one ignored it. The story of humans had always been loud, desperate, full of mistakes. But now it carried something else. Something rare. Stillness. Not the stillness of defeat. The stillness of understanding. There were still challenges. The earth had not made things easy. The new people had to work, had to grow, had to learn again. They had to face new questions. What does power mean now? What does leadership look like without control? What does a future look like when no one is above another? But they weren't alone anymore. The planet itself guided them. And as time moved forward again, they began to teach their children the stories. Not just of how the world ended, but of how it began again. They spoke of the light fracture, of the great silence, of the return. They honored those who walked into the unknown not to escape, but to become something better. There was one last echo in the soil, buried deep beneath the fracture, that no one found for a long time. When they finally uncovered it, it wasn't a weapon or a machine. It was a notebook. Its pages were cracked and faded. But the writing remained. It said, "We were not the heroes of our story. We were its lesson." And maybe that's enough. Below it, a single sentence written in a child's handwriting. "Don't forget us, but don't copy us either." The book was placed at the center of the new gathering place. Not a temple. Not a tower. Just an open circle under the sky, where people met to speak, to sing, to remember. And above it the stars blinked. One of them moved. Another satellite. Or maybe a ship. Whatever it was, it didn't come with demands. It didn't come with fire. It simply observed. And waited. Because the galaxy had seen extinction before. It had witnessed worlds destroy themselves again and again. But rarely had it seen what came next. A world that chose not to rebuild the same system but to let go of it. A species that didn't just survive but changed. And that change echoed outward. New signals. New invitations. Not for war. For understanding. What they got was extinction. But what they gave the universe in return was hope. The Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a message. And it was finally being heard.